Yeah, 5.6 is another big release from Spider Strategies. We try to do one of these about every year. This year's no exception. The theme of this release is getting data in and out of Spider Impact. Now, there's a lot of additional functionality just like every single release, but this release focuses on 3 tentpole features. First is pulling data from web services. Web services is the common way that websites or applications talk to each other. RESTful web services is the most common way, the most modern way. And we are able to connect to just about any web service out there and pull data in. Thousands and thousands of software as a service products have REST APIs, and now you can take in advantage of that with automated data feeds for Spider Impact. Secondly, we expose our data now. You can have access to your KPI performance data, your scorecards, that kind of stuff in external software. And I'll show you exactly how to do that, but the general idea is that we issue you a token, you use that secret token to pull data in and out of Spider Impact, and your IT staff can now use Spider Impact data outside of the app. Finally, forms come to life. There's a lot of great interactivity for pulling data that you already have that's stored in other systems, but sometimes there's data that you don't have stored anywhere. So for example, you might want to create little mini apps for collecting data, maybe sending out surveys to people. That's where Spider Impact Forms come in handy. Forms now have the ability to dynamically interact with data as you're filling them out. So you can type in a value, new fields can show or hide, certain things can be required or optional. Forms in version 5.6 now interact with user feedback, and we'll walk through that as well. So before I jump into those main tentpole features, let's explore some more quality of life, smaller enhancement that makes the software better to use. So whenever you show text on dark colors, it is now light colored text. So in this particular example, we're showing a report. The 5s here are on a dark blue background, so the 5s are now colored white. The same things happen on this cycle chart where customer in the lower left corner is on a dark red background. That's going to show up light. Same thing here with these 4 names in the upper left-hand corners of the tree map chart. Or in this situation, these are all the different colors that performance bubbles can be. You can see here with the darker colors, they all have white text. So that's the kinds of things that we're going to constantly chip away at in the app, especially for a briefing. If you're sitting in the back of the room, this is going to make it a lot easier to see the screen. For dashboards, we now show where the data is coming from when you're editing the dashboard. So for example, I am editing a report. Well, it now says it's coming from the planets data set, so I can click on that and drill directly into the data set to see where the data is coming from. When you're on a dashboard, you can now embed a shared form on your dashboard, so you can collect information at the same time as displaying your information. And we didn't stop there. We said, well, if we're allowing things to be embedded, we might as well allow the entire software app to be embedded in any other app. So for example, you could have a SharePoint portal and you could copy the URL of the administrative section to manage your Spider Impact users, for example. And you would authenticate if you weren't already logged in, and you would see that directly outside. In this example, we're going crazy and we're having Spider Impact embedded in a Spider Impact briefing. For the scorecard section, in version 5.5, we introduced some great new functionality where you could define your own custom scoring. When you had percentage scoring, the scores could not be below 0% and they could not be higher than 100%. That restriction is now not there in version 5.6. And so in this particular example, I have a score of 110%. Anything above 110% gets a dark green. A score between 100 and 110 gets a normal green. This is what it looks like in action. You can see here when we go up, 110, 125, 150, that starts getting a darker green. When you have KPI approvals turned on, this is off by default, but a lot of folks for larger organizations want to be able to review KPI values before they go live in the system. And so you can turn on this KPI approval flow. There's 3 new enhancements that apply to KPI approvals in version 5.6. The first is filters. I can filter just based on certain organizations, just show me the sales KPIs, or you can filter based on calendar. So show me just the monthly KPIs, the quarterly KPIs. We now also show all of the thresholds and actual values for the approval process. In this example, the measure value is going from 7 to 8, But just for reference, we also say, well, the worst threshold 0, goal is 5, and the best is 8. And finally, some KPIs are named, there are some organizations that have KPIs named the same things in different parts of the organization. And it can be, you need the context of where the KPI lives in your scorecard in order to determine which KPI it is. So now you can mouse over the little hierarchy icon and it shows you the name of the KPI as well as all of its ancestors all the way up its org tree. In data sets, we have a bunch of new enhancements. On the Datasets Records tab, right here you're looking at the green arrow. We've always had that permission, modify individual records. So if I have the ability to modify individual records, any field that we've designated as editable, I can go in and I can edit the values for those fields. And that works really great most of the time, but there are some situations where you need really fine-grained control. For example, I have the ability to view all dataset records, but maybe I only have the ability to edit the first name, users' names when their email address ends in .edu or something obscure like that, right? In that situation, you can turn off the View Records tab so people can't go to the Records tab and update all the records they have permission to see. Instead, the only other place to update records is in the Forms section. So you can develop complex logic and forms to do whatever you want, and people cannot update their records in the Records tab if they don't have that permission now. They must go to the Forms section and use these advanced forms that we're going to be talking about to update their records. A lot of surveys, a lot of mini apps, things that don't come from any system of record, things, data sets where you're just collecting data. Every single one of those fields is going to be able to be editable, right? So now there is a checkbox on the top which can turn on the ability to edit every single field for a data set. It's going to save you a whole bunch of time because you don't have to go in and modify every single field individually. We also have a confirmation when deleting data set permissions for groups, so now you won't accidentally delete group permissions. And when you edit a data set that is pulling its data from a spreadsheet, if that spreadsheet has multiple worksheets, we now show it. So Google Sheets, Microsoft Excel, both of those can have multiple worksheets. We now show that information when editing your data set. Finally, for performance reasons, we're starting to get customers using millions or tens of millions of records and data sets. Once you get really large data sets and you start linking them together, any database is going to take a little bit longer to show your charts and graphs on your dashboard. So what we've always done is once we show that, it takes a few seconds to show your chart or graph, and then we remember that data. So the next time someone requests that identical chart or graph, if you hit refresh or whatever, it's going to instantly show you that data so we don't have to recalculate it. The problem is, once you update your data set, maybe every week you get new data imported from a system of record, we have to throw out all that information that we pre-calculated ahead of time because you can't be trusted anymore. There's new data. One of the performance enhancements we've got in version 5.6 is instead of just throwing away that pre-calculated data, we add it to a dataset, the dataset query cache refresher. And it's this process that goes around in the background, and when the server isn't doing anything, it just starts chewing away, knowing that, hey, you requested this chart before, I might as well get that data information, I want to get that information ready for you to go in case you need it again. And so now, whenever you import new data, it's not going to need to recalculate everything the first time it's viewed. The software now recalculates ahead of time. And you can keep an eye on that background process, the same with all the other background processes like alerts or dataset KPI calculations in the background process status in administration. For reports, we've got a lot of great new enhancements. There's a filter, or two new filters, called Does Not Begin With and Does Not End With. For dataset reports, you can now show the number of records. So for example, if I'm grouping all sales by salesperson and I hide individual records, in addition to saying, Jane Jones over here sold this much worth of software, we can say Jane had this many sales, there were this many sales records. So it's an additional piece of information you can show for dataset reports. And you can now dynamically insert the organization ID for SQL reports. So in this example, we've got failed logins for this organization. It's querying the actual Spider Impact dataset itself, but we can now say this report displays different data based on the organization that it lives in. So we can roll this thing out. Let's say I have a template with 50 organizations and I can roll this report out to all 50 templated organizations. It's going to report different data for different organizations in the same way that we've always been able to do calendar period start and calendar period end. So you dynamically reference that calendar period selector in the upper right-hand corner. It's just a new type of way of doing dynamic SQL reports. Now this is the bread and butter of the version 5.6, import and export. We've got those tentpole features like I was talking about, but there's also additional import and export functionality. So we've got roll-up trees. Dataset roll-up trees are incredibly valuable when you've got really large deployments. We've got a customer with 30,000 organizations, one organization per employee, and they all roll up the org tree. Well, this would be virtually impossible to do without dataset roll-up trees. You can import those with JSON, but now you can import them with a spreadsheet. So you can manage your entire organization structure in a spreadsheet and import that rather than typing the values into the software. When you're importing dates in a header row, we now import all of the data in all of the worksheets. And this is really helpful for importing data. For example, I've got a worksheet with monthly data on one worksheet and a quarterly data on another and a yearly on another, because you've got these headers on top that say, January 2023, February 2023. Well, that would only work with monthly KPIs, right? It's not going to work with yearly or quarterly. And so if you're going to import KPIs with different calendars, you're going to need multiple spreadsheets. This also is the format that we export data in. So when you're creating a KPI value import file from the software, it's going to create a spreadsheet import with multiple worksheets. So now the software imports and exports data in exactly the same format. All right, so this is a little bit technical. I'm going to walk you through what it looks like to import data from a web service. If you're not a technical person, don't worry about it. You don't need to sweat the details of this. Your IT staff are going to be able to figure it out pretty easily. But I did want to walk you through it just so you can get a kind of feel for the way Spider Impact communicates with other software products to import data. And the best way to do that is to launch into a live demo. And fortunately, I've got Spider Impact up here and running. So we're here in administration. There's a gear down here. And we're in import connections. And this lists all of the connections we have to our external data sources. There could be databases or SFTP, Google Sheets, Zapier. We care about web services. And we're going to click the Add Connection button. And I'm going to create a REST web service. Now, there's all kinds of different configuration options. We've got OAuth, anonymous, basic. There's get or post, URLs, parameters, headers. How do we know how to communicate with the web service? Well, that is going to be different for every single web service, and each of those web services you want to talk to is going to have documentation. So if I want to connect to Salesforce.com and pull in my Salesforce data, they have a developer website that documents all their APIs. In this particular situation, we're going to be connecting to Zendesk. Zendesk is our ticket management software where we reply to customer requests. We might want to set up KPIs because we want to make sure we're responding to customers quickly or making sure that our ticket support load is balanced among our support reps, that kind of stuff. So here is the documentation. How do you connect to it? Well, it says, the URL, spiderstrategies.zendesk.com/API/version2/search.json. And what do you send it? You send it query equals, the type is a ticket, and open is status, right? I want us to get open tickets. And that would give her information about open tickets. Oh, and you also have to send it an email address and a password. All right, so that's what I want to do. I want to pull in all of my open tickets from Zendesk. But let's take another example here. Same kind of thing, but I just want to get the count of open tickets. Just send me back that I've got 55 tickets open, right? Well, it's virtually identical. If you look at the end, though, it's a little different. /v2/search.json. This is /v2/search or /count.json. So it's slightly different, but just like the vast majority of web services out there, the entire URL up to this point is identical. And then based on the information you want, you're going to send it additional information like these queries and stuff. Okay, I only say that just to show you in general, here's what the web service stuff kind of looks like. So let's switch back to Spider Impact. As we saw in the documentation, it's username and password is how you get data from Zendesk. So I'm going to copy my username. And I'm going to copy my password, and Spider Impact securely encrypts this data and stores it behind the scenes so other people don't have access to it. click next. And this is that base URL I talked about. This is not the URL that it's going to connect to every single time. It just says, in this import connection that I'm creating, everything has to start with this, and you can add additional stuff in at the end of the URL. And that is why we keep import connections and imports separately. Because high-level administrators can go in there and they can create an import connection with a username and a password, or maybe a secret token they use to get access to the server. And they can lock in a base URL that has the data can only be sent to a URL starting with this. And then they can take that secure information and hand it off to somebody else, and they can't edit the username and password. They can't change that base URL, but they can use that import connection to build imports within Spider Impact. And I'll show you how that works. So we'll hit next here. Who do we want to have access to this Zendesk connection? Well, we're going to give the admin group access, and we're going to give Jane Wilson access. So Jane Wilson, the admin, and me, the Spider Impact administrator, will have access to this new Zendesk connection. So I click done. It's reaching out. It's communicating with Zendesk, making sure it can communicate and talk back and forth. And we have a success message. The web service is online, and we're good to go. So from here, we can start building imports using this connection. But instead, I'm going to log out, and I'm going to log in as Jane, just to see what it's going to look like for Jane, who's not a high-level administrator. So when Jane goes to the admin section and she goes to import connections, she's not going to see all those other import connections that she doesn't have access to. She just sees this Zendesk connection that we've given her access to. And when she expands it, she can see it's online, but there's no way for her to edit it. She can't get to that username and password. She can't change that base URL. So now she's going to go into datasets, and she's going to build a new dataset using this connection I've set up for her. It's going to call it Zendesk Open Tickets, and it's going to be a REST web service. And this is the only connection she has access to. Look at this. The URL is baked in. She can't change that. She can only add additional stuff to the end. So based on the documentation, she's going to hit search.json. She's going to send information about what she wants to search for. So it's a query. The type is ticket, and the status is open. Give me all the open tickets. She's going to hit next. And this is all the data we just got back from Zendesk. And she can choose if she just wants, this from field or just the via field or whatever. She wants this entire big block of information. Each one of these is going to be a record. It's going to be a ticket, right? So this is a Zendesk ticket. I'm going to scroll down here. This is another Zendesk ticket, right? And that's it's pretty easy to just grab the data you want. Hit next. We don't want to transform the data or clean it up. And these are all the fields that we're getting back. Looks good. Hit next, and we can schedule this import. We can run it every 6 hours, every 12 hours. We're going to run it every night at 2 in the morning. We're going to get new data, and we're going to replace all records when it comes in. And that's it. Our data set's building up, and there are 47 tickets that are currently open, and you can view all the information here in the Records tab, but we can explore it just like any other data set. These are all the fields. So I click on priority, and look at this. Of the 47 we've got, 80%, 81% are blank, no priority, 5 are urgent, and 4 are high priority. Now from here, I can create charts and graphs and use this data anywhere directly from the data set, but instead I'm going to create some KPIs. So I'm going to click on this, create dataset KPI. Urgent open tickets. And I choose a dataset field. Now sometimes your imports will have a calendar period. It'll say you had this many tickets in January, this many in February, right? But this one, all we have is a snapshot. It only tells us how many open tickets we have today. And so with a snapshot KPI, it's going to, the current month is October. It's going to keep importing every night October's data. And then as soon as it gets to November 1st, it's going to remember that last value I imported for October, and it's going to start importing for November. And so you build up a history of KPI performance over time. So that's what a snapshot is. And calendar's monthly. Let's create it. and we're done. We'll do another one. High priority open tickets. It's also a snapshot. And finally, you can do the total number of tickets by going to the total display. Total open tickets. And just like that, we've created a whole bunch of KPIs. So you can imagine what it's like to just bring in a whole bunch of data sources and just create, and those KPIs are going to update live. Let's check them out. Go to the scorecards section. We'll switch to October. Look at that. We've got 5 open tickets, 4 high priority, and that hasn't updated yet. That's the last one. There's that background process chewing through things, right? So let's go to urgent open tickets. I'm going to go to edit. And this is going to be goal only. High values are worse. And let's say anything more than 3. I'm allowed to have 1 or 2 open high priority issues or urgent, but 3 or more, that's red. So I hit save. And now I've got a red KPI that's going to update its data live from the system of record. So we're pretty excited about our ability to connect to web services, and we think you will be too. All right. Next on this list, we're great about pulling data in. We're also great about sharing data. So I'm going to show you how that works live as well. Let's log out of Jane, back in as the admin user. And we've got a section here called API tokens. And API tokens are what we securely use for people to communicate with Spider Impact. If you notice here that I've already created 5 different API tokens created by Spider Impact Administrator. It's going to use the Spider Impact Administrator's permissions for what you can get access to. This is exactly the same as what we do for shared dashboards and strategy maps, right? I created this mobile world strategy map and I shared it. Well, that person is going to have their permissions applied to that shared strategy map. So here we are in the API token section. I'm going to create an API token. I'm going to call the name of whatever system is actually going to be using the token. And I'm going to copy it. This is my magic secret password, right? It's whenever you present this token, Spider Impact is going to allow you to use it to securely pull data from Spider Impact. This is it. That's all you have to do in the Spider Impact side. But if you notice here, there is a link for interactive API documentation. And that is actually built into the Spider Impact app itself. So I'm going to click that link. And I'm going to show you this. So here's the Spider Impact app. If you notice, that's the URL. /admin/API tokens. Here's the documentation /resources/API docs, right? So the actual Spider Impact app itself is the one serving these instructions. And that's important because you can interact with these instructions just like you can interact with the real Spider Impact app. Let me show you how that works. So what are the steps? 1, get an API token. Done. 2, test your API request. That's what we're going to do. And then 3, when it's time to send the real request, here's how to send it using our API. Perfect. So there are 4 API endpoints. This one, if you send it that token we got to the Who Am I endpoint, it tells you about the user. Secondly, if you send that token to the organization's endpoint, it's going to give you a list of every organization in the software. If you send it a organization ID to this endpoint, it's going to give you a scorecard. And if you send a scorecard ID to this endpoint, it's going to give you information about that one scorecard item. So let's play around with this a little bit. I'm going to click on organizations, and there's detailed documentation that's perfect for your IT staff. Some example organizations, here's Acme Incorporated, and then operations and sales, right? But what's nice about this is you can actually interact with this live. So we're going to click this authorize button. I'm going to paste in my token. And now we are hitting this information live. So for example, I can hit try it out. And I'm going to hit execute. And it's going to reach out and it's going to pull out all of the organizations live. So it's Spider Impact, your trial environment, Mobile World Incorporated, key measures, right? That's what the API came back with. What's cool about this is what the real organization tree is. Spider Impact, your trial environment, Mobile World Incorporated, key measures, right? It's real live data from your real live system that you're able to interact with. And here's like the curl statement that you would get, that's my token. And your developer would take this and they would say, all right, go into the external app, paste that in. And It's going to actually, this is the real data coming back, your trial environment, Mobile World Incorporated, right? This is how easy it is to interact with the Spider Impact API. Let's do one more thing. We've got Mobile World Incorporated. It's got an ID, the organization ID is 115. So we're going to go to the scorecard endpoint. We're going to try it out. And we're going to say organization ID of 115. And you can send detailed information or not. In this default, there's a lot of different configuration options. In this default, we're going to get 3 months worth of data. Looking good. I'm going to hit execute. And it's going to come back with the entire Mobile World Balance scorecard with 3 months worth of data. It's giving you performance data. Here's the score of the root object. Here's the financial perspective. It's got an ID, the period start date. There's the score. We've got KPI values in here, all kinds of detailed information. There's a objective, improved knowledge and skills. So any of your performance data that's KPIs, objectives, perspectives, any of those things in your scorecard tree, we expose via this API so you can use this in software other than Spider Impact. All right, so talking about forms, forms is a whole bunch of brand new enhancements that's becoming popular with users. You can copy an entire form now and duplicate that, so you can play around and roll out multiple versions of a form quickly. You can also duplicate form pages, so you can say, all right, I'm going to A/B test this, and I'm going to try out this one version of the form page for a while, or yeah, let's switch over to using this other version of the form page. Bunch of quality of life things. Before, when we had a blank value listed in the user interface, it was just blank. Now we actually put the word blank in there, so just little things like that. The save and cancel buttons are now enabled or disabled based on whether there's information that needs to be saved or not. So by default, they're disabled like this. If I go in and change a value, they're going to become enabled, so I can cancel it out or hit save. And here's the big feature, the third of the 3 tentpole features. Forms come to life. So here's a form, a very simple form I've got. It's going to send you to a different page in the form based on the email address you type in. So for example, I'm going to fill out my name, company, St. Paul Steel, Tammy at St. Paul Steel, and then we're going to hit next. It's going to take you to the second page. It's the everybody else page, and it's going to ask for your country, right? And if you notice here, it actually displays information about whatever you entered in the first field, but it's not editable, right? There's Tammy Jones, St. Paul Steel is the company. All the information you entered in the first page of the form, we're displaying back to them in the second page and collecting more. All right, let's refresh, try this form again. This time we're going to fill it out with someone with .edu, and that's what we're keying off of in our page logic. No company, Scott at mycollege.edu. Go to the next page of the form. Look at this. There's now a second page, Welcome Education Enthusiast, and we ask for additional information. You got to type your school name in because you typed a .edu email address. You see company is blank here. We're going to come back to that, but we are just in the current version of this form, we're just displaying the values they typed back right back at them. So company in this situation is blank. Okay, so let's edit the form. How are we doing this magic, right? How are we keying off of their email address? Well, it's all attached to that next button on the bottom of the first page, and we've got some logic in here now. If the point of contact email ends with edu, save the record, go to the education page. Otherwise, save the record and go to the not education page, and you saw that in action. Well, how do we define that kind of advanced logic? Well, it's pretty easy. It's drag and drop. It's a logic builder. There's if you meet a certain set of criteria, then do this, else do this, right? And you've got if, else, if, all that kind of conditions. And we can go back in and you can modify this. Let's say we're going to add an additional condition. If the point of contact email ends with edu and the country is Argentina or Australia, and right, you can add a whole bunch of different ands. It meets criteria 1, criteria 2, criteria 3. In this situation, we're doing something silly. The first name doesn't begin with some nonsense letters, right? So it's A and B and C. But you can also switch this over to or. It's A or B or C, right? Or you can link conditions together. So now we've got if it's A and B or C. Or, we can swap it. It's going to swap them all. If it's A or B and C. So you can do whatever kind of advanced logic you can think of, multiple conditions, nested conditions, all of this is easy to create right here with drag and drop. But we're going to cancel out of that and go back to this form. So we're going to edit the last name field, and we can now see that there are 4 different states for these fields. There's editable, which is, you can type in whatever you want in the box. There's text only. We've seen that in action, right? On page 2 of the form, it showed you just a text only representation of what they had filled out on page 1. It just, puts the text. You can't edit it. There's disabled, which shows you an editable version, but grayed out that you can't click on. And there's hidden, which hides the whole thing together. And those disabled and hidden states are pretty handy when you're interacting with the form. You can change all the different states based on data you enter earlier in, and I'll show you what that means. So here we are, the company is blank, right? I showed you in that earlier step, sometimes they're going to have a company, but sometimes they're not going to have a company. So how do we deal with that? Well, we're going to go into page display actions. This advanced logic also applies to page display actions. We're going to add a condition. Whenever when someone first visits this page, if the company is blank, what are we going to do? Well, we've got new actions in version 5.6. You can change the widget state. You can change widget input validation. So change widget state is maybe we can hide that text field, or we can disable it, or we can change input validation, say before the company was required, now it's not required, that kind of stuff. We're going to do change widget state, and we're going to make the company field hidden. So now on page display, based on whether they've entered information on the first stage or not, that entire widget that's displaying the company name may or may not show. So let's see this in action. So someone fills out the form. James Yang. Sorry, I jumped ahead just a second. So this is the second stage. Notice the company's missing, right? Because they didn't enter a company in there, so it doesn't show up. But you don't have to do the advanced form logic between form pages like I was showing you. In that one situation, you enter some data on page 1. Based on the data you entered, different things happen on page 2. You can do it all within a single page of the app. So in this situation, I've built the exact same logic into an on-change example. So they fill out a .edu email address, and it instantly adds the school name as a required field that wasn't showing before. And if they go back in and they remove that edu on the end and change it to .com, that field hides. So that's what I'm talking about with forms coming to life. You can build these interactive little mini applications with multi-stages, multi-logic. You've got all that advanced if, else, and, or logic that allows you to build some pretty advanced data collection. Finally, the last thing I want to talk about is usability. The software is getting more and more easy to use. We're asking users for their feedback, and we're incorporating their feedback into the software. Here's a bunch of small little changes. When you're creating a note, the box was fixed size and height, and now we just grow it to fill it up as much space as available on the screen. For people who perceive color differently, like maybe colorblind folks, you can mouse over the color picker, and it's going to show you a text representation of every one of those colors. When you run a SQL query in the administrative section, sometimes the results can be really wide. Well, now we stick that result and center it in the middle, so you scroll your results underneath it where the original query is still on top, so you can reference it and modify it really quickly. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. This is a loading representation that shows, hold it. This is what happens when you first display the screen. It's handy for loading Spider Impact, but it's really handy when you have a shared dashboard or strategy map, because sometimes it can take a few seconds for that dashboard or strategy map or form that you've shared to show. Well, if you embed this software in a third-party application like a portal or something like that, you're going to see a loading message instantly rather than it taking a few seconds of nothing. The trend lines on a tooltip for charts are now much more darker, easier to see, so you can see if the trends are going up or down. And there's 20 more little enhancements like this. So we think that Spider Impact is going to be a huge advancement with version 5.6, and we can't wait for you to try it out.